At 26 years old, Ethan Carter did something most people only talk about when they're frustrated on a Monday morning. He walked away from an $80,000 a year job. No safety net, no guarantee. Just a quiet belief that life could be bigger than meetings, emails, and waiting for Friday to feel alive again. For a moment, it felt like freedom, the kind people dream about late at night but rarely act on. And then, just 3 months later, Ethan made $100,000, more money than he had ever seen in his life, earned on his own terms. That should have been the ending. The success story, the proof that betting on yourself works, but it wasn't. Because what happened next is the part nobody talks about. And if you've ever thought about quitting everything to chase something bigger, this story might change the way you see it forever. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Ethan didn't always feel trapped. In fact, when he first landed the job in Austin, it felt like everything he had worked for finally paid off. Growing up in a middle-class household, stability wasn't just important, it was the goal. His parents had spent years reminding him that a good job meant security and security meant peace. So when the offer came through, $80,000 a year with benefits, it felt like he had stepped into the life he was supposed to want. For a while, he leaned into it. He bought better clothes, upgraded his apartment, started living like someone who had made it. But slowly, almost invisibly, the excitement faded. What replaced it wasn't failure or hardship, it was repetition. Days started blending together in a way that made time feel like it was moving faster than it should. Weeks disappeared, months felt like copies of each other, and somewhere in that routine, Ethan started noticing something uncomfortable. He wasn't building a life, he was maintaining one. At first, he ignored it. Everyone around him seemed fine. His coworkers joked about the same things, complained about the same deadlines, and counted down to the weekend like it was the only real part of life. That was normal, that was adulthood. But Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. It wasn't dramatic. It didn't hit all at once. It showed up in small moments. Sitting in traffic, staring at the car in front of him, wondering how many years he would repeat the same drive. Sitting in meetings, hearing conversations that sounded important but didn't feel meaningful. Even at home, when everything was quiet, there was this constant thought in the back of his mind asking a question he didn't have an answer for. Is this it? That question followed him everywhere, and eventually, it led him somewhere unexpected. Late at night, when the world slowed down and distractions faded, Ethan started exploring. At first, it was harmless curiosity, watching videos, reading stories about people who had built something of their own, people who weren't tied to a schedule or a location, people who talked about freedom like it was something you could actually create. It sounded almost unrealistic, but something about it stuck with him, not because it promised money, but because it offered control. And once that idea took hold, it became hard to ignore. He didn't quit right away. Instead, he tested the waters quietly. After work, when most people were unwinding, Ethan was starting a second shift, trying different ideas, learning skills he had never needed before, failing more times than he could count. Some nights ended with nothing to show for hours of effort. Other nights gave him just enough progress to keep going. It wasn't glamorous, it wasn't fast, but it was different. For the first time, his effort felt directly connected to something that belonged to him, and that feeling was addictive. Still, there was tension. During the day, he was the reliable employee. At night, he was chasing something uncertain. Two versions of his life running side by side, slowly pulling him in opposite directions. And the more progress he made on his own, the harder it became to sit comfortably in a job that no longer felt aligned with what he wanted. The breaking point didn't come from anger or frustration. It came from clarity. One afternoon, sitting in a meeting he had attended dozens of times before, Ethan realized he hadn't heard a single word for the past 10 minutes. His body was there, but his mind was somewhere else entirely. And in that moment, he understood something simple but powerful. If he didn't make a change now, he probably never would. That night, he made a decision most people spend years avoiding. He opened his laptop, stared at a blank email, and started typing. It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't emotional, just a few sentences explaining that he was leaving. But behind those words was a shift that would change everything. His hands hesitated before pressing send, because once he did, the structure he had relied on for years would disappear. No guaranteed income, no safety net, just uncertainty. And then, after a long pause, he clicked send. The next morning felt different. Not because anything around him had changed, but because everything ahead of him had. The routine was gone. The structure was gone. In its place was something both exciting and uncomfortable. Freedom. At first it felt incredible. No alarm clock, no commute, no meetings that drained his energy, just time. Time to think, to build, to create something on his own terms. For a few days it felt like he had made the best decision of his life. But freedom comes with a cost that isn't obvious at the beginning. As the days turned into weeks, the excitement started to mix with pressure. His savings began to drop. The ideas he was working on didn't immediately turn into income. And for the first time, there was no backup plan quietly supporting him in the background. Every decision mattered. Every hour mattered. And slowly, the weight of that responsibility started to settle in. There were days when nothing worked. Days when he questioned everything. Sitting alone in his apartment, staring at a screen, wondering if he had made a mistake he couldn't undo. The doubt didn't arrive all at once. It built gradually in moments of silence, in the gap between effort and results. And without the structure of a job to anchor him, those thoughts had more space than ever before. Then something shifted, not dramatically, not overnight, but enough to notice. One of the ideas he had been working on started gaining traction. At first it was small, a few sales, then a few more. It didn't feel like a breakthrough yet, just a sign that maybe he was on the right track. But the momentum continued, slowly at first, then faster. The numbers started to grow in a way that felt almost unreal. And for the first time since quitting, Ethan felt a sense of validation. He leaned into it, working longer hours, focusing more intensely, pushing himself harder than he ever had before. Because now it wasn't just an idea anymore, it was working. The numbers kept climbing. $1,000, $5,000, $10,000. Each milestone made the next one feel possible. And then, one morning, he opened his account and saw a number he had never seen before. $100,000 earned in just a few months, entirely on his own. For a moment, everything went quiet. This was the goal. The moment that was supposed to make all the risk worth it, and in some ways it did. But what followed wasn't what he expected. There was no lasting sense of arrival, no feeling that everything was now complete. Instead, there was a new kind of pressure, because now he had something to maintain, something to protect. And the fear of losing it was stronger than the excitement of gaining it. The work didn't slow down after $100,000. It intensified. Every day became about keeping the momentum alive, responding to customers, improving the product, staying ahead of competitors. There was no off switch, no clear boundary between work and life. The freedom he had chased started to feel different, less like escape, more like constant responsibility. And then came a moment that changed how he saw everything. One night, sitting alone at his desk, multiple tabs open, messages waiting, tasks unfinished, Ethan realized something that stopped him completely. He had replaced one system with another. He had left a structured job to build something of his own. But in the process, he had created a new kind of pressure that followed him everywhere. It wasn't about the money anymore, because he had already proven he could make it. It was about what that money required from him: the time, the attention, the constant thinking. And for the first time since hitting that milestone, he asked himself a different question. Not, how do I make more, but what kind of life am I actually building? That question didn't have an immediate answer. But it changed the way he approached everything that came next. Instead of chasing growth at all costs, he started paying attention to how his work made him feel. He began restructuring his days, setting boundaries, letting go of things that weren't sustainable. It wasn't easy. It meant slowing down in areas where he could have kept pushing. But it also meant gaining something he hadn't fully experienced before: balance. Looking back, Ethan realized that quitting his job wasn't the hardest part. Making $100,000 wasn't the biggest achievement. The real challenge was figuring out what to do after that. Because success without direction can feel just as empty as routine, and the version of success he had been chasing at the beginning wasn't the one he actually wanted in the end. Today, his life looks different. Not perfect, not effortless, but intentional. He still works for himself, but not in the same way he did before. There are boundaries now. Space to think. Time that isn't constantly consumed by the next goal. And more importantly, a clearer understanding of what success actually means to him. Because in the end, the story isn't about quitting a job or making money. It's about what happens when you finally get the thing you thought you wanted and realize it's only part of the answer. So now the question is simple. If you were in Ethan Carter's position, standing at the edge of something safe with a chance at something uncertain but bigger, would you take the risk?